Sure. At 11:44 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time on Saturday night, Donald Trump posted something on Truth Social that set every energy market, every military commander, center, and every government in the Middle East on high alert. If Iran does not fully open the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours, the United States will hit and obliterate their virulent signs, said Trump. Starting with the biggest one first. A deadline expires at 7:44 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday. Iran's response came within hours. The Iranian army said that at any strike on Iran's energy facilities would prompt attacks on U.S. and Israeli energy and infrastructure assets in the region, specifically naming desalination facilities across the Gulf. Two statements, one deadline, and somewhere between them, the most dangerous 48 hours of this entire war. Today, I'm going to break down exactly what Trump is doing, Iran is threatening in response, what happens to 87 million Iranians and the global energy system if either side follows through. More than anything that has happened in 22 days of war, maybe the moment this conflict crosses a threshold it cannot come back from. Start with what Trump is actually threatening, because the words power plants cover an enormous range of possible targets, and the difference between them matters enormously. Iran operates approximately 110 natural gas power plants, according to data compiled by Bloomberg. It also has solar, hydro, wind, oil, diesel, coal, geothermal, and status. The country's electricity grid is sophisticated and deeply interconnected, a legacy of decades of investment that survived even the worst years of sanctions. The second largest is the Shahid Salimi plant in Mazandaran province, near the Caspian Sea, Ojer, 2,215 megawatts. Third is the Shahid alternative. For context, Florida's West County Energy Center, the largest operating natural gas power plant in the United States, produces 3,750 megawatts. Iran's biggest plant is roughly three-quarters of that capacity, serving a country of 87 million people. Trump did not specify which plant he meant by the biggest one first. He may have been referring to Damavand. He may have been referring to the Bushehr nuclear power plant on the Persian Gulf coast, Ilerl, already struck last week, which at around 1,000 megawatts is not technically the largest, but carries enormous symbolic and radiological risk. His threat was deliberately vague on specifics and precisely clear on intent. The word obliterate was chosen carefully. Obliterate does not mean damage or degrade or reduce capacity. It means remove from existence. Now, here is what that actually means for 87 million Iranians, because this is the dimension of this threat that has received almost no attention in the past 12 hours of coverage.
Iran's electricity grid is not a luxury. It is the infrastructure that keeps a modern society alive. Hospitals run on it. Water treatment plants run on it. Sewage systems run on it. Food refrigeration and supply chains depend on it. Communications networks, including the military communications that the IRGC uses to coordinate its operations too, run on it. Destroying Iran's largest power plants does not just turn off lights. It sets off a cascade. Without electricity, water treatment stops. Without water treatment, drinking water becomes unsafe within days in major urban centers. Without electricity, hospitals cannot operate critical care equipment. Without electricity, food supply chains collapse because refrigeration stops working across the entire distribution network. Without electricity, the winter heating systems that millions of Iranians depend on in a country that experiences temperatures that's well below freezing in its northern and central regions stop functioning. 87 million people, the two or three largest power plants on their grid obliterated in a country already under a sustained military campaign that has killed over 2,000 people and displaced millions. The 1907 additional protocols explicitly prohibit attacks on objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population. Power plants that provide electricity for water treatment, hospitals, and heating for 87 million people fall directly within that category. I'm not saying this to make a political argument. I'm saying it because the legal and humanitarian framing of what happens next matters for what the international response looks like, a crew, and that response directly affects how this war ends.
Now look at Iran's counter-threat, because it deserves exactly the same level of careful analysis that Trump's ultimatum has received. The Iranian army statement named two specific categories: energy infrastructure and desalination facilities belonging to the U.S. and its allies in the region. Desalination facilities are not incidental infrastructure in the Gulf states. They are existential infrastructure. 42% of fresh water from desalination, UAE. Without desalination plants running continuously, the UAE cannot sustain its population. The Persian Gulf has essentially no natural freshwater resources. 70% of fresh water from desalination, Saudi Arabia. Abqaiq facility, which processes approximately 7% of global daily oil supply, is also on Iran's target list before this war began. The East-West Pipeline, the Ras Tanura export terminal, the largest crude oil loading facility in the world. The UAE's oil terminals at Fujairah, already struck twice in this war. Qatar's remaining LNG infrastructure at Ras Laffan, what was not already destroyed. Iran is describing, in the most formal military language it has available, a scenario where it systematically destroys the energy export infrastructure of every Gulf state that hosts American forces. Not selectively, comprehensively. Now look at the context in which this ultimatum was delivered, because the timing tells you something crucial about what is actually happening inside the Trump administration right now. On Friday, less than 24 hours before the 48-hour ultimatum, Trump posted on Truth Social that the U.S. is, quote, getting very close to meeting our objectives as we consider winding down our great military efforts in the Middle East. Winding down. Those were his exact words, Friday night. Then Saturday night, 24 hours later, obliterate the biggest power plant first, 48 hours or else. Al Jazeera's correspondent in Washington noted the contradiction directly. He said there seemed to be a gap between what the White House appears to want in the Strait of Hormuz and what the U.S. military says they have already accomplished. That gap between the military saying, we have degraded Iran's ability to threaten the strait, and the president saying, we will obliterate power plants if the strait is not open, is not a communications problem. It is a strategic coherence problem. Here is a specific issue. If the military's assessment is correct that Iran's ability to threaten shipping in the strait has been significantly degraded, then the pressure on Iran to comply with the 48-hour ultimatum is based on a capability that may no longer fully exist. Iran may have already lost much of the military infrastructure that was keeping Hormuz closed. Opening the strait now might simply reflect that reality rather than compliance with Trump's ultimatum. But if that is true, if the strait is opening because Iran's capability has been degraded rather than because Iran decided to comply, then Trump cannot credibly claim his ultimatum worked. And if he cannot claim it worked, the political logic of escalating to power plants disappears. The timing of the ultimatum, one day after talking about winding down on a Saturday night from Mar-a-Lago, has the feel of a decision made without full coordination with the military command that is executing this war. Here is a strategic calculation that every serious analyst is now doing. Let me give you both scenarios directly. Scenario A, Trump follows through. Power plants are struck at Monday, 7:44 p.m. 1. Iran executes its counter-threat immediately. Gulf energy and desalination infrastructure goes under sustained attack. Saudi Arabia's oil terminals, UAE's water supply, Qatar's remaining LNG capacity. 2. The energy market, already in crisis at $112 per barrel, faces a second shock of potentially historic severity. Goldman Sachs' worst-case scenario of $147.50 oil stops being a risk scenario and becomes the base case. 3. The humanitarian catastrophe inside Iran enters a category that international law has specific language for. Every international human rights organization on Earth describes what happened in those terms simultaneously. 4. China's calculation changes. China gets 40% of its oil through Hormuz, a strike on Iranian power plants that triggers an Iranian strike on Gulf energy infrastructure, sending oil to $150 and threatening the energy security of 1 billion Chinese people, is the scenario in which China's position on staying on the sidelines changes most dramatically. 5. America's diplomatic isolation deepens dramatically. Switzerland blocking weapons exports, NATO refusing to participate. This was already happening, now it accelerates. Scenario B. Trump does not follow through. Monday passes, plants stand. Every red line Trump has drawn in this war, open Hormuz in 48 hours, stop attacking the Gulf, stop targeting American bases, has been stated, restated, and then either quietly abandoned or retroactively redefined when Iran did not comply. An ultimatum that expires without consequence is not just a failed threat, it's information. It tells Iran and every country watching exactly how seriously to take the next ultimatum. It tells the Gulf states whose protection depends on American credibility that the security umbrella they're depending on has limits that can be probed and found. It tells China and Russia, both calculating how far they can push in their own theaters, that America's stated red lines may not be the actual red lines. Trump has said things in this war that didn't happen. It would last 2 weeks, Iran was totally defeated, prices would drop like a rock, winding down. Each unfulfilled statement reduces the credibility of the next one. Before we get to Monday, let me tell you what Iran has already done in the past 48 hours, because this is not a war that is winding down. Iranian missiles struck Dimona and Arid on Saturday, the first time Iranian missiles have penetrated Israel's air defense systems in the Negev, injuring 64 people and shattering apartment buildings near Israel's main nuclear research center. Iran targeted Diego Garcia, the joint UK-US base in the Indian Ocean, with what Israel's military described as a 2-stage intercontinental ballistic missile, the first ICBM-range missile used in this entire conflict. The war is not winding down. It is entering its most dangerous phase.